The courtroom fell silent the moment he walked in, a tall, tired, broad-shouldered man with a limp he tried hard to hide, a frayed file tucked under one arm, and the desperate determination of a father who had run out of options. As he stepped toward the defendant's table, Judge Marissa Hale's eyes narrowed with an impatience sharpened by years of ego, status, and unchecked confidence. She didn't see the veteran who had fought in sandstorms and firefights, nor the single dad who had carried his daughter through nights of sickness and hunger. She saw only a struggling nobody, a man representing himself because he couldn't afford an attorney. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him, and in that cold courtroom, John Mercer felt the weight of years pressing down. But what no one knew, not the judge, not the opposing counsel, not even the court clerk, was that beneath the worn jacket and the weary face stood a mind once celebrated in the highest legal circles, a prodigy who had walked away from everything after war shattered the world he once believed in. If you believe in kindness, redemption, and second chances, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to channel names so more beautiful stories can reach hearts like yours. John's story had not begun in desperation. Years ago, he had been a rising star, an undefeated attorney known for dismantling corruption and defending the helpless with a brilliance that made news headlines. But the war had taken more than blood and bone, it had taken his peace, his confidence, and the life he had built. When he returned home with his newborn daughter after losing his wife in childbirth, he discovered that the courtroom, once his battleground, had become a place filled with echoes he could no longer face. He left it all behind to focus on being a father, working odd jobs, living on pennies, and giving every moment, every piece of his heart, to the child who became his only anchor. Now, years later, he sat in court accused of negligence he didn't commit, his landlord trying to evict him with falsified documents, hoping to flip the building for profit. John had tried to reason, tried to negotiate, but corruption rarely listens to kindness. When he received the court summons, he knew he couldn't hire help, not with medical bills and school fees stacking like mountains on his kitchen table. So he stood alone, facing a seasoned opposing lawyer and a judge who had decided he was already guilty. Judge Hale looked him over with thinly veiled disdain as he struggled to organize his papers with one functioning hand, the other weakened from an old battlefield injury. The room smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, and the heavy silence made every shuffle sound like thunder. She questioned why he had not brought counsel, hinting that people like him wasted the court's time, her tone dripping with assumptions about his education, intelligence, and competence. Whispers fluttered like cold gusts through the courtroom as spectators looked on, some pitying, others amused. John swallowed hard, but inside him, something flickered, an old fire, a memory of the man he used to be. Not for pride, not for ego, but for his daughter. She was the reason he had fought through pain, homelessness, and the crushing grief of losing a partner he barely had time to love. She was the reason he stood here, even though fear clawed at his ribs. When the opposing attorney presented fabricated evidence, the judge barely glanced at it before nodding. She didn't want the hassle of a complicated case, not from a man she had already mentally labeled as a lost cause. But when she asked if John had anything to say before she delivered her ruling, something shifted. He took a slow breath and suddenly the trembling in his hand steadied. His voice, quiet at first, grew stronger, more articulate, unfolding arguments with a precision that made heads lift and eyes widen. He dissected each fake document, pointed out inconsistencies, referenced statutes and precedents with flawless clarity, and exposed the landlord's scheme in minutes. The courtroom that once dismissed him now leaned forward in stunned silence. Judge Hale blinked, taken aback. This was no uneducated veteran fumbling through the law, this was someone who moved through legal language like a surgeon with a scalpel. The opposing attorney began sweating, his arguments unraveling under John's calm, unshakable logic. Minutes turned into a masterclass in advocacy, delivered by a man everyone had underestimated. But the journey that led him to this moment had never been easy. John's nights were filled with sleepless hours, holding his daughter through tremors of asthma, or stitching together broken car engines just to earn enough for her medication. He had skipped meals, pawned old belongings, and patched holes in her shoes until the soles gave out. There were days he stood on the edge of breaking, feeling like the world had forgotten men like him, men who had served, sacrificed, and returned to find their country had moved on without them. Still, every morning, he would look into the bright eyes of his little girl and find a courage no battle had ever given him. As he finished his defense, the courtroom remained frozen. Judge Hale stared at him with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. She asked how he knew so much law, her voice softer now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. John didn't boast, didn't reveal the trophies or recognition he had once earned. He simply explained that he used to practice law, long before life took him on a path he hadn't chosen. He spoke of service, of loss, of a daughter who kept him going when everything else collapsed. His words wrapped around the room like a quiet storm, heavy, unexpected, and deeply human. The judge's expression changed as she realized the gravity of her mistake, not just in judgment, but in character. She had mocked a man who had carried more weight in a decade than most carried in a lifetime. She had dismissed a veteran, a father, a once brilliant attorney whose silence had not come from ignorance but from wounds she could not see. For the first time in years, something cracked inside her, the guilt of realizing how often she had treated people based on perception instead of compassion. She reversed the eviction attempt, ordered an investigation into the landlord's corruption, and offered John legal assistance moving forward, but he thanked her quietly, explaining that he would prefer to stand on his own now. The judge nodded with an understanding that had been absent before. Sometimes dignity is the only armor a broken man has left. As John stepped out of the courthouse with his daughter waiting outside, the evening sun washed over him like a gentle blessing. He lifted her into his arms, feeling a peace he hadn't